Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. I've talked in the past about some of my process for speccing out servers, and I think I may also have talked about building some workstations from scratch. That is, speccing the parts that are necessary for a very custom build and then assembling them all into a working whole. I also, on occasion, get the opportunity to assemble desktop systems for friends and family. The use for this is usually that they want something custom. They know they want parts to do certain things, but they're not really sure which parts are best, which parts will work together, and they're definitely not sure about assembling it all themselves. And that's where I come in. They can tell me, I want it to do this, this, and this. And I'll say, okay, well, how about this setup? And we'll use these parts. And they're like, that sounds great. Can you please go build that? And so I do. In this case, I'm going to be building a new PC for my spouse. They've not had a completely brand new PC for a while. I think what they said was sometime in the 90s. Definitely in the era where, you would get a system and then, consider and, maybe talk to technical support and then decide maybe you do really need to get that upgraded 4 megabyte video card. I remember those days. Those were fun days, but we're not there anymore. We've got some newer parts. So over the last several months, I went through the process of speccing a system that the intent is that it will be used for quite some time. There will be parts upgrades through the years. Obviously, I'm expecting a new video card, possibly new hard drives, new storage. There may be an upgraded power supply along the way. There may be a new CPU. Who knows? But the intent with this system build is to have a stable foundation that can keep going for a significant period of time. Most of my builds, I'm not going to be happy if they last for less than 5 years. And my personal desktop system, it's more usual to get at least 10 years out of it for my personal desktop. So if my spouse can get 10 years of use out of some of these parts, even if we upgrade other things along the way, I'll consider that a win. Right off the bat, I'm going to say no part of this is sponsored. No part of this is me shilling for anybody whatsoever. These are all parts that I have selected for this purpose, bought and paid for, and yeah, no freebies, no sponsorships, no endorsements either. These are the parts that I selected to fit this purpose. There were a couple of other wrinkles to consider. We want this to be dual boot between Windows and Linux, with separate storage drives for both Windows and Linux, and then another storage drive for files that are essentially bulk storage. It doesn't need to be performant. It can be accessed by either operating system as necessary. Okay, cool, fine. Video capabilities, this does need to be capable of running video games. Excellent, but it also needs to be able to do 3D modeling work with Blender. Okay, so that's something that needs a little bit of performance there as well. Okay, so the reason I keep looking over here is I've got parts to show you. The CPU is an AMD 9800 X3D, very common choice for system builders because it's very good performance. With storage, for the SSDs anyway, I'm going with Crucial T700 SSDs, 1 terabyte, because I asked, do you want something bigger? And the answer was no, 1 terabyte is fine. Okay, and then 1 terabyte is what we can get. The other storage drive, not showing that right now, is a 4 terabyte Seagate Barracuda unit. That's fine. We've got a pack of two 32 gig sticks, so a total of 64 gigs of RAM. DDR5, what is it? 6000? Yeah, DDR5 6000. And on the motherboard, this is the big one. It is an Asus ROG unit, the X670E Hero. And this is for right now, it's probably a bigger, heftier motherboard than is really needed. But the motherboard is the core of the system. And so if I'm building something that I want to last 5, 7, 10 years, I'd better make sure I choose a motherboard that will still have capabilities that are pretty good for day-to-day use in another decade. So you start out at the higher end so that it's still functioning the way you want at the end of it. For the power supply, it's a Corsair RM1000X. And Corsair's a good brand, so I'm selecting that. Oh, and the CPU cooler I have over on this side, it's an MSA Mag Core Liquid. That's what that says, P240. Just a simple AIO water cooling loop with the radiator already there. Cool. There are other parts that will be going into the build. Today, I am focusing mainly on showing you the process of getting the motherboard itself set up. The motherboard will include all of the parts that I have shown you just now, with the exception of the power supply. Obviously, that doesn't go on the motherboard. But the reason I showed you the power supply is we're going to hook the power supply up to the motherboard before anything else is installed so that we can do a flashback on the BIOS. Flashback is a feature that tends to be on higher end motherboards, but it allows you to flash a new version of the BIOS to the motherboard with no CPU, no RAM, just power plugged into the motherboard. It's a nice feature. It has a lot of caveats that are specific to each motherboard. It has to be a certain port on the motherboard that has the USB drive. It has to be formatted in a certain way. It has to have the file named by a certain name. It has to be in a certain location on the drive. Lots of caveats because there's no CPU, so there's really very little intelligence here. It has to be just so. So the point of this is, if you've got a board that was manufactured a little while ago, but you buy a brand new up-to-date CPU that is enabled by a higher BIOS, a newer version of BIOS, you might need a way to get that BIOS on the motherboard so that your CPU actually works. You can always buy two CPUs, buy an older one, use it to install the BIOS, and then ship it back and put the new one in, but that's kind of a pain. So flashback is a good feature to have if you need a way to make sure that you can just put a new BIOS on regardless of what other parts you've got installed or not got installed. In this case, I didn't select this motherboard specifically for flashback. It just happens to be a feature that was included on the motherboard, so I'm going to use it. I'm going to flash the new BIOS, and then I'm going to continue with installing all the other parts that I showed you, the SSDs, the RAM, the CPU cooling, and basically getting everything assembled on the motherboard so that in the next video, I can show you the process of installing the motherboard into the case and then configuring all the other things. Blu-ray drive, hard drive, routing power cables, etc. All that fun stuff. So with that, I think it's time we get started. So here we go. So first off, as I'm getting the motherboard set up on the table here, the setup is not the best for recording, and I apologize for that, but we're going to make the best of it. The first thing that I'm going to do is get the power connected to the motherboard in order to update the BIOS. This just requires the main ATX connector. It does not require the CPU power. It doesn't require any auxiliary power, just the main connector. You can see the BIOS flashback port is outlined with a ring. The USB stick goes in there, and then it's just holding the BIOS flashback button until it starts to flash blue. And when it starts flashing blue, the BIOS update has been started. And I just set it down there and let it do its thing. You know, it's a shame about all the fancy bling that we're never actually going to see that, because it's going to be in a case with no concern for the visuals. Once the BIOS update is finished, I can just shut off the power, remove the USB stick, and then I'm going to remove the power connector from the motherboard so that I have a freer hand installing the rest of the parts. It was a little difficult to detach the connector. I plugged it in there good and hard, but then I got it out, and I'm going to rearrange the motherboard so that we can try and get a little bit better image on camera. I decided to start with the M2 sticks first. So the first thing I need to do is remove the heatsink, and then I'll be able to install the M2 cards. You can see that most of these already have thermal pads pre-installed, so I just have to remove the plastic, and then I can insert the M2 drive and latch it in place. I also showed briefly the underside of the heatsink also has a thermal pad. Both of them have that, so the plastic will need to be removed from those before I actually reinstall the heatsink. But when it's time to reinstall the heatsink, it can be a little bit challenging to find the right screw placement because of the massive heatsink in the way. Imagine that. But with time and a little bit of readjustment as necessary, like so, then you can make it work. The next thing that I'm going to be working on is the CPU. It's important to note you do not remove the cap when you lift it up. The first thing I'm going to do is check the motherboard to make sure that the socket pins are all in good condition before I install the CPU. When I decide that they are, then I can get the CPU ready. When I show it to the camera, you'll see the top left corner has a little triangle. That indicates the pin 1 position, and there it is. When you install the CPU, you have to make sure you align that with the pin 1 marker on the motherboard, which I just had to double check to make sure I had it, and then I can make sure that they align. When you latch the socket into place, the cover will pop loose naturally on its own, and there you go. Next up is RAM, and I'm checking the motherboard manual quickly to make sure I know which slots should be filled first, and then it's a matter of installing the modules. Now, they only fit in one way, and you might have some difficulty getting them to fit, especially if, like me, you can't quite see where they're supposed to align properly from off camera. I had to pick it up and take a better look at it. But then, once I did, I could get the modules in there, and then I could make sure that they were locked firmly in place, and that's what you need to do for that step. Next up is the CPU cooler. This is an AIO, so you've got a radiator component at the top left, the pump at the top right, and a mounting bracket on the bottom right. Putting this together was a little bit of a chore, so let's just go through this. First off, you need to take the plastic off the pump unit so that it's nice and clean, then put the mounting bracket on, and then there are some clips that you need to screw into the sides of the mounting bracket, and those will attach to the mount on the motherboard. A little bit of thermal paste right in the center of the CPU, and then I could actually start trying to attach the pump unit. The first run did not go smoothly because I couldn't really see if it was clipped in securely on the opposite side of the pump, and so we had to take it off and decide to readjust. I also decided to clean the thermal paste off the CPU so that I could make sure I had a nice good seal with no additional air bubbles. I also cleaned the thermal paste off the bottom of the pump, but then I added some more, and then from a different vantage point, I could make sure that both of those were clipped in, secured them, double checked that they were mounted correctly, and we could move on. The last part of this assembly is attaching the fans to the radiator, because the AIO's radiator does not come with the fans attached. You can see the mounting hardware for that in the bottom right-hand corner. Figuring out which direction the fans blow the air is the first step. Typically, and I did not remember this at the time, but typically the main logo, the fancy looking one, is on the intake side, and the technical looking label with the specs and other information is on the exhaust side. So I started setting this up and then realized it wasn't on camera. So flipping it around, you can see the main logo is on the intake side, and then it's going to exhaust and push the air through the radiator in order to actually cool the system down. There are 2 fans for this, so it's just a matter of making sure that they're all attached in the right place. I also put some thought into making sure that the power cables for those come out the direction that I want them to be in the finished case, and then the AIO assembly is complete, and so is the motherboard. And that will pretty much be it for today. We've gone through, we've flashed the BIOS, we've installed all of the necessary parts onto the motherboard. Like I said, next week we're going to continue this process by installing this assembled unit into the case, and then finishing the rest of the build by wiring everything together and installing some of the other parts that don't go directly on the motherboard. So hopefully you've found that enjoyable, interesting to watch. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like to see me demonstrate or talk about, or questions that that came to mind while you were watching what was going on, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.